What's going on, everybody, and welcome to the episode 1 of the State Strong podcast. I'm stoked. You guys are here. Episode number 1. Maybe this is your first time listening, or maybe you checked out one of the other podcasts and you're like, man, I love this podcast. I want to go back and listen to every episode. Regardless of why you're listening to this episode, we're glad you're here. So what is the State Strong podcast? Well, the State Strong podcast came from an idea, concept that I had for State Strong, and really taking State Strong like it's a slang. State being the state of who you are as a person, both physically, mentally, sometimes even spiritually, and strong being the strength that you've gained from your life experiences, both positive and negative, and how they've impacted who you are today. And so I'm stoked. I'm stoked to get this thing out to everyone. The goal's obviously number one, for it to be entertaining, and then in addition, inspirational. Maybe there's some people's stories that you can relate with. Maybe there's some things people have walked through that you've either walked through or are currently walking through. And hopefully this gives you some excitement and some hope that, you know what, regardless of what you've come through, you can take those experiences and turn them into strengths and ways to overcome adversity and things that come against you and inevitably grow as a person. So my first guest is someone I've known for years and years and years. And to be honest with you, when I came up with the idea of this podcast, he was one of the first people I was interested in getting on here. A good friend of mine by the name of Eric Potts. He's got a super interesting story and has really been thriving both on a professional level with various employers he's worked with, but also now as an entrepreneur in some of the endeavors that he's taken now. So get ready, episode number 1 of the State Strong podcast with the Eric Potts. So what's going on, everybody? I've got my good friend here, Mr. Eric Potts. Eric Potts, how you doing this evening?
Doing wonderful.
So Eric and I have known each other, oh my gosh, how long's it been now?
I don't know.
That really shows the value. That really shows the value of our friendship, Eric.
12 years?
Yeah, it's probably been like
13 years? How long have you guys been married?
Let's see. I've been married this summer will be 10 years. I've lived in Jackson for like 11 years, and I've known you longer than that.
So 12 or 13 years?
Probably like 12 or... Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy.
Gosh, we just get better looking the older we get. Actually, no, I just keep getting more grays. So I've also got my good buddy Clay, my good buddy Clay in the room. He's kind of like my bubby. I lived with him for a year, so it worked out well. He's manning the computer, making sure we don't say anything too stupid. So thanks so much for coming on the State Strong podcast, Eric.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to start with a fun story. And this is a story that I've heard told from 2 different perspectives because it involves you and it involves another friend of ours.
Yeah.
It's Eric kind of spans all kinds of different interests. And so as you'll see in his story, he gets involved in all kinds of different things, including he enjoys doing a lot of outdoor stuff. Like, remember we went and did the top roping out in Athens County.
Oh, yeah.
And that was amazing. So we were fortunate enough that Eric got his top rope. Is it a rappelling license?
I just learned how to tie some knots. So
you
guys were trusting me with a lot.
You just made us feel safer and told us you had some certification that didn't exist. So, but one of these stories, I wasn't there, but I heard about with you and another good friend of ours and 2 young guys that you took out for the first time camping in West Virginia.
Oh, yeah.
You know what story I'm talking about?
I know what story you're talking about.
So why don't you tell the audience about the bear story?
All right. So granted, we're in West Virginia, so there are no grizzlies in West Virginia. Hindsight 2020, I might have been a little less scared if I would have realized at the point. But I have to say it was one of the most frightening moments of my life, listening to that bear growl outside of our tent and sniff and smell. So a good friend of mine and Marty's, we took a couple of young guys down to the mountains in West Virginia, and I don't remember how many bears they said there were per square mile. There might have been something crazy like 5 or maybe even 20 bears per square mile. insane amount of bears.
And you'd camped out there before this, hadn't you?
We had went one other time.
Okay.
So we were trying to climb like the highest peak or point in West Virginia, and it's not that high in comparison to other places in the country, but it was kind of a big deal for us. And so we climbed the first mountain to get down into this little ravine where there was a creek and a waterfall and stuff, and we set up camp and we hung out and made dinner, and we did all the bear safety stuff, hung up our food in like a bear bag. So you basically throw a rope over top of a tree branch and hang your food from that. And then we had also cooked far away from where we slept that night. But as we were cooking, it started to pour rain. And we had bought a couple extra tents for the guys that were coming with us. We probably paid like $20 for the tents. So
real high quality stuff.
So we got our $20 worth, and it started to rain through the tents. And these guys that were with us were underage, and we were I think we were like 20 at the time.
Yeah, because you guys were using it like as a discipleship thing, weren't you?
Yeah.
Like you were trying to use outdoor stuff to get the chance to, minister to young guys and, just kind of disciple them. And I don't know. I knew some of the guys you were, taking opportunities to take out in the woods and, I know it sounds so bad now that I just said it. So, but it was really awesome, except for what you guys experienced this one time.
Yeah. So yeah, these guys were underage, and we didn't want to have to come back and explain that, your kid got hypothermia going with us on a backpacking trip, and we had to take him to the hospital.
That'd be bad.
Yeah. So it started raining through the tents, and so did the first thing that came to mind, and we combined the tents. So we each had a one-man tent, and there were 4 of us. So we cut down the tents, 2 of the 4 tents, and layered them over top of the others. And it stopped the rain to come through. So we went from 2 one-man tents 4 one-man tents to 2. And there were 4 men at the time. So we all had to double up. And so that was a fun night. It was the other good friend that we went down with, not one of the kids. We had to end up spooning a bit.
Yeah, and I heard too it was super hot because you guys had the extra tent on top. So like anyone that's never gone camping, usually tents, when you buy them, they're made to kind of let a little bit of air flow out the top, and sometimes you can open the front and let air through the front. But you guys had these $20 tents on top of your nice tents. So wasn't it getting pretty hot in there?
Yeah, so it was pretty steamy. This went from bad to worse.
This is not the point of this story, and it doesn't sound as bad as what it's being made out to sound. So anyhow, you guys are finishing up. You've got your tents covered. The rain's not coming in, and You guys fall asleep.
Yeah, but before we fell asleep, I opened like a little vent on ours, and then the other tent. So there were 3 $20 tents and 1 decent tent. So the younger guys ended up in the $20 tent with another $20 tent on top, and they didn't really have a vent. So they just opened the door wide open.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so unbeknownst to us.
So the other tent, the door was wide open.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so as we had set up camp, and we were trying to make sure we followed all the bear procedures and all that stuff. We were kind of in a hurry, and we threw the bags up in the tree pretty quickly. And one of the younger guys actually kept some food down and kept it in his tent. So yeah, it was probably about 11 o'clock. We fell asleep a little bit before then, and we woke up to the most unnerving snorting and snarling I've ever heard in my life. So a bear had made its way into our camp and proceeded to try to find out what we were and what we were doing, and sniffed at our heads and snarled and growled outside of our tents, probably from 11 p.m. to about 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning, leaving and coming back. And we did the thing that you are not supposed to do with a black bear. We just sat there. And I was so terrified that my hands were down at my side, like in a sleeping bag, right? and I was too terrified to move them over my face to prevent the bear from, clawing my face potentially, because I was just so unnerved by the.
So did you guys know at the time it was a black bear?
I mean, yeah, that's the only thing it would have been in West Virginia.
Yeah, so where you were at, predominantly there's black bear, and you guys were there for hours with this bear in and out of your camp. Now,
Yeah.
did the boys know that the bear was there?
They did not. They slept through the entire thing, and they did not believe us the next day that a bear had come. So the good friend and myself that were kind of doubled up in the tent, we were kind of chatting back and forth. And I remember one really interesting moment or funny moment. He said to me, "I really got to pee." And I just thought of Dumb and Dumber. And I said, "Just go, man. Just go."
Just go in your pants, man.
Just
Oh
go.
my gosh. And didn't he say, like, as he woke up having to pee, and so he was trapped there? Oh man, that'd been terrible. I always take some of my friends' stories and steal them and tell them amongst other people, so that way I can have cool stories to tell sometimes. So yeah, I love that story. So Eric, are you from the Southern Ohio area originally? Are you from Jackson County originally?
I'm from Ohio, I guess you could say. My family is from Jackson County, my mom and my dad. But I grew up in Jackson County, in Franklin County, in Fairfield County, in Logan County,
So you moved all over the place.
and Ross County. Yeah, in fourth grade, I went to 4 different schools. So
Really?
that's
So I didn't know about this. So what caused you guys moving around so much?
primarily my parents were split up, and I went back and forth. And then my mom was also moving around quite a bit at that time. She was probably whenever I was back into school, or whenever I was in school, we moved back to Ohio at the time. We lived in Mississippi and Florida, but that was just when I was, under 2 years old. And but she got into another relationship with my brother's father, and they were married, and then they were divorced. So then she was moving a bit, trying to get things figured out there. So, and I moved between my mom and my dad. On top of that, which added up to 4 times in the 4th grade. But
Wow, that's a lot that's young enough to where you can't really do much about it because you're not independent enough to get out, but that's old enough to know this probably isn't normal. So, I mean, for you, that going down in the 4th grade, what kind of effect did that have on you as a kid then?
yeah, now it's like I hate the security questions ask you your 3rd grade teacher, because I'm like, where did I go to school at that time? But I don't know if it impacted me that big as a kid, because I feel like as a kid you're a little more, I don't know, you roll with the punches a little more per se, right? Like they say kids are pretty, I don't know, adaptable to things. So I feel like I just kind of went with it.
Yeah.
And I think I did really well at like showing up at a new school and making friends. I kind of figured it out, like how it worked, and it was kind of cool in a way because I got to restart.
Yeah.
Every so often.
Well, and kind of turned you into a little social butterfly then, didn't it? Because like you said, you'd show up, all new friends, and you'd have to figure it out from there. Because, I mean, school can be so brutal, and kids sometimes can be so brutal. So
Yeah.
I know, I had my fair share when I was a kid of getting picked on and bullied and things like that. And being the new kid, if you don't find some way to connect really quick, I mean, it can be like getting thrown to the wolves and being a piece of meat. So
Yeah.
So when did you end up here in Jackson then? Kind of like your last move.
I ended up in Jackson the first time, I want to say like I was in 6th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had moved away. My dad had moved to Pennsylvania, so I also moved to Pennsylvania after a bit, and I lived with him, and I came back in the 10th grade.
So you were in Pennsylvania for a couple years then.
It was like a year and a half.
Yeah.
So almost 2 years, I think.
So was there anything that do you feel like you had enough roots laid down in that year and a half in Pennsylvania that like that town and that area, had any kind of influence on you? Because I would imagine the school was probably a little different than some of the schools you were experiencing like here in Jackson.
It was pretty rural as here. It was about the same.
So you were still kind of small town.
It was definitely small town. People did think I was from Georgia when they heard me speak, so it was funny. I asked for Pop, and they were confused. I'm like, I'm from Ohio. And they're like, you're definitely from Georgia. So that was funny to me, just thinking that. Because it was technically right at the borderline of New York. Not New York City, but upstate New York. So there were 3 towns that were connected, and they called the Valley, and you would just walk down the street, and all of a sudden you're in a different town. And one of those was in New York, and the other 2 were in Pennsylvania. And actually, there was half of a town that was in New York and half a town that was Pennsylvania. So it was kind of a little more northern, definitely than southern Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't different very much.
Yeah, it wasn't too much of a culture shock. So let's fast forward. You get into high school. So what kind of things were you involved in high school? Were you into sports? Were you into any kind of extracurricular activities? What kind of things did you end up in high school? And so high school for you was back here in Ohio.
Not all of it. Some of it was in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So when I lived in Pennsylvania, I did play sports. I did play football. I did play before I moved as well. But when I came back, I decided not to continue playing. And I said I was going to start working, and I did start working. But then I started doing other things as well. But I was kind of doing that as well when I was in Pennsylvania, and I was playing sports. So I kind of started down that track probably about 12.
So down that track. So why don't you expand a little bit on what you're talking about?
Yeah, so I would say, on and off from about 6th grade or so up all the way through the end of high school, I dabbled in, drug use and then, selling drugs at that time.
So when you were 12, what was kind of that thing that initiated you into starting, whether it was alcohol, whether it was weed, whatever it was, was it just friends? Was it some event that caused you to, seek something out? What started that for you?
I don't think it was any type of event. I remember, I think I was 12 and I was playing football, and I stove my shoulder, and I got I'd gotten some pain pills or something. It was something really not a big deal at all. But as a 12-year-old, I thought it was cool to take a couple extra. And then I had friends at the time that were smoking weed, and I think I was with them smoking weed as well. I can't.
So you, as far as any kind of prescription drugs, your first experience was from an injury.
Yeah, technically. I've never really thought about it that way, but
yeah. Well, and I've been surprised by how many people I've spoken to that have experienced any type of addiction. Mm-hmm. That a lot of times they've been athletes, like high school and grade school athletes, and because of some type of injury, they got a prescription. And you're a kid. Either you've seen friends do it, or you've heard about it, or you just have access to it. And when you take it, it makes you feel better. So why not try a little bit more and see if it makes you feel better? So I know it wasn't my experience, but I know I've spoken with a lot of people that have had their addiction experience started from an injury. So let's fast forward. You said that you started, you dabbling with it off and on, but then you mentioned you started selling it. So how old were you when you first started selling?
I candidly don't remember. I might have been 13 or something like that, but
it's hey, you know what? I wonder if any of my little football buddies would buy some of my drugs.
And it was probably I found some weed somewhere and added some oregano to it. So.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that anyone that bought drugs from me at that age was probably smoking something out of their
Don't hold it against him. He was 13, people. Come on
Yeah.
now. If you're listening and you're like, wait, I knew that weed was funky. Now you know.
Yeah, I might have hit up my mom's spices a little
That's
bit.
amazing. So, you're in high school. You're in Pennsylvania. How were you able to do the high school thing and still kind of have this other part of your life going on, like the using drugs, selling drugs? I mean, how it's almost like you had two lives, because to me, you're not going to stay in the high school football team if they also know that you're selling drugs.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Like, I remember actually some of the seniors in that school at the time were well-known drug sellers, and I kind of aspired to be like them. They were did really well on the football team, and like I saw they had a nice car, and I also knew that they hooked us up with drugs. So I'm like, I could be like that.
So a lot of it came from like a quote unquote like older brother figure that you saw in school, and you thought, I want to be like that. So you said that you dabbled with it off and on through high school. So towards the end of your high school and graduating high school, what did it get better? Did it get worse? What happened with, kind of this thing that grew from when you were 12?
Yeah, and so I would definitely say, well, without a doubt, that it got worse. It grew more intense, if that makes sense. I kind of went through spats where I decided not to anymore and tried to stay away from drugs and things like that. So ending up like on my senior year of high school, I started selling coke, and that was right before like or like right at the beginning of the opioid epidemic in Ohio. A lot of my friends were using oxycodone and things like that, and I definitely have to like thank God for the fact that I was scared of needles, because I never tried it. I never tried anything like that. I don't know if I would have been, in the same position in my life today had I tried that. So I definitely thank God for that. But my senior year of high school, I decided to start selling coke. I figured it might be a little more lucrative than marijuana.
So you decided to start selling coke as a senior in high school as a business decision because you knew you'd make more money off the coke than the weed.
Yeah, I kind of, part of it was whenever I turned 18 at the beginning of my senior year. So my birthday's in September. So I was like right at the cutoff for starting school, having been able to start school at an earlier age. So I was 18 at the beginning of my senior year. And I had gotten in trouble before some as a juvenile. I never really gotten on probation or anything like that. But whenever I turned 18, I was using drugs, and my mom rightly called the cops on me a couple times because it got pretty obnoxious. And so I ended up with some fines. And my way to solve my problems with the court system was to, take on, more criminal activities.
So you were paying off your fines with your drug selling. Well, I mean, I guess that's one way to look at it. So
that was my mentality at the time. Obviously, it never worked out. So
and so you're graduating high school. You've already had some situations. You said you never ended up on any kind of parole or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you're graduating high school. Did college go through your mind? Did finding a job go through your mind, or were you kind of just all in at this point? With dealing.
At the beginning of my senior year, college was definitely on my mind. But as I started selling coke, it really slipped to the back of my mind because of the money that I was making. At that time, at the peak of what I was doing, and I'm thinking back now to how I got started, but at that peak point, I think I was selling like 5 ounces every 2 days that I was running back and forth between the Jackson area and the Chillicothe area. And it was somewhere around a kilo a week of coke that I was selling.
Yeah, so you were making good money.
That's when the idea of college really slipped my mind, because I thought that everyone had it wrong and that I could make a lot more money selling coke.
Yeah, and I always joke and say it's also tax-free money, so you weren't paying any taxes on any of that. So what went on those first couple years after high school? You know, your I don't know if I'd call it a dream, but your ideas of what your future was going to look like changed in between the beginning of your senior year and transitioning to the end of your senior year. So what did those first couple years look like? Were you still living with one of your parents? You know, did you end up out on your own? And, you know, how did things transpire?
So that whole kind of delving into selling coke and kind of the highs that it brought me to and the lows that it took me to spanned within a year. So really less than a year. So I went from, you know, the starting of my senior year thinking of college to around the middle way through starting to sell coke. I'd always sold drugs in high school and things like that, but it had never been anything too major. To deciding that I didn't need to stay in high school any longer, and deciding I didn't need to live with my parents any longer, because I was basically living out of hotels as I sold coke. Not necessarily selling from the hotels, but just every day I would go to the mall and buy new clothes and set up a new party.
And so you were an 18-year-old, like living out of hotel rooms to some extent and just doing your own thing. And so in your mind, you know, and I don't know if this ever crossed your mind, but like, were you thinking like, I'll just do this the rest of my life?
Yeah, I kind of had in the back of my mind that it wouldn't be forever. You know, I always remembered thinking that, you know, this has got to come to an end. Part of my mind thought of, you know, classic drug dealer movies where they make a bunch of money and move to Mexico or something like that. And live the good life, right? But I was kind of intent on living the good life at that time. And so all the money that I was making was going right back out the door.
Yeah, so you weren't necessarily saving. You were spending as quick as you were getting it. Were you using too, or were you just selling?
Whenever I started, I wasn't using, and actually that was one of the reasons that I did so well with coke, because it wasn't a drug that I used. I think when I was thinking back earlier, there was someone I worked with, and I worked at a restaurant here in Jackson, and I did my first drug run with them to get coke. And so I just basically took them to Columbus, and they went to like a crack house and got the drugs, and they paid me money just to run them, and I had no interest in it. I just wanted to get the money to buy weed and you know, go about my day. And I realized how much he paid and how much, you know, how far of a length he was willing to go for it. And I thought, this is a lucrative, you know, a little more lucrative than selling marijuana. So, yeah, that was the start. However, the end, I got to the point where I was probably doing an eighth to a quarter of an ounce of cocaine a day, which is an extreme amount. And it only lasted a short period. I remember one night, me and a couple friends, we actually each crushed up an 8-ball ourselves and snorted it in one line. So like an eighth of an ounce of coke. And so it was, I went from not using it at all to using it all the time. And so that was another way that obviously money was going right out the door.
Yeah. I mean, that's, you know, whenever you get into it, the hard part about that addiction is it's gonna creep into every part of your life, including your wallet. So, you know, now you're using, it sounds like every day. Obviously, this couldn't continue like this. So what was kind of the breaking point of all this kind of crashing down or you know, it coming to an end?
Yeah, so the biggest breaking point was I had like another guy, a few guys that I was selling with at the time. But one of the guys that I was, one of my connections, where I had another connection to pick up the drugs. We had went to go pick up some of the drugs that day, and he had turned down my friend at the time, and said that he was being watched. And another guy jumped out of the car while we were there at the apartment complex picking up the drugs, and he was just kind of went around the side of the building and was kind of taking a leak. And the mailman came over and yelled at him and said he was with the sheriff's department and that he doesn't need to be doing that, and he would write him a ticket.
So the mailman said this.
The mailman said this and said that he was actually a sheriff undercover. So our supply ran dry at the time, and right after that.
Wait. So let's back up to this. So you're with your buddies. You're getting ready to do a deal, and your buddy runs around the side of the house to take a leak.
Yep.
And this mailman, who turns out to be an undercover officer, like shouts at this guy to stop. And so you guys hear him and stop. Like you guys don't get busted right then.
No, we don't get busted right then. But so there were about 4 of us in the car. One guy ran into the house to try to get the drugs, and the guy said, "I'm not selling anything right now."
And because he knew, he knew he was getting watched.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There were 2 of us that were in the car, and one of the guys jumped out and was taking a leak. And
that's crazy.
Yeah.
So then back to what you're saying. So after that.
Yeah. So, like directly after that, I don't remember if it was after or directly before. I was goofing off with my main friend at the time that we were kind of running the drugs with, and we were in a parking lot doing donuts. And we pulled out of there, and I was going a little too fast. We ended up rear-ending someone.
Were they in the car?
Yeah, they were in the car.
Yeah.
And so that kind of like cut out the car that I had at the time. So whenever I rear-ended them, it did a lot of damage to the car, and I think it ended up ruining the transmission because transmission fluid leaked out. So it shut down my supply, and it also shut down my transportation because I was running the drugs between towns. And that's how I was making the money. So it was just kind of snap of fingers, it was gone.
So what did you do at that point? Like you obviously weren't making the money you were before. I mean, how were you still trying to get, coke for your own habit?
Yeah, so that is, I was still at that same point of trying to live the same lifestyle. So I definitely had, enough money to sustain that lifestyle for a short period of time. But we tried to get a different connection, and we went somewhere in Columbus, and we got kind of set up, and we tried to buy too much, and so we ended up with a bad batch of drugs that we couldn't sell. We tried to, but it was horrible, and no one wanted to buy it, and so that it lost our re-up money.
So you had a bunch of drugs, and no one wanted to buy it. So, what did you guys do with all that? You got a bunch of illegal drugs. No one wants to buy it, so you're not going to make any money. Did you just end up doing it all?
We used some of it, but it was like they had cut it so bad that...
You guys didn't even want to use it. Did you feed it to your fish? What do you do with...
I don't remember. That was a pretty... Yeah. So I was living a kind of pretty extreme lifestyle at that point where... I was drinking a couple fists of liquor every night and waking up to a case of beer and layering in the coke and weed and whatever else I get my hands on at the time. So
it sounds like you were starting to get towards the bottom of the barrel, as they say. And where was your head at that point? Like, was it just like day to day? Like, I got to do this thing the next day, and you're not worried about next week or months down the road? Yeah,
exactly where it was.
So, what was kind of the, breaking point? Because the Eric that you're describing that right now is definitely not my friend that I'm sitting across from right now. So when did all that stop, and how and what caused it to stop?
Yeah, so, I got out of selling coke because of that, but my life didn't change dramatically yet. I kind of just stopped. and started rethinking. Like at that point in time, I was just so set on, I can't sell weed. I have to sell coke because coke makes more money and weed's not worth anything. And I still had these fines, and I think I actually had a warrant out for my arrest. I think because I skipped a court, I don't remember.
Just something stupid. You ended
Something
up.
stupid.
Yeah.
And like I ended up in jail, but for one of the first, maybe it was the second time. I think it was the second time because I had the court events from the prior time with the fines. And
But
so
you
forth.
weren't busted for the heavy stuff you were doing. It was just.
No. Yeah, it was just, I didn't pay a fine, and because of that, they had a warrant out for my arrest, and I was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
So I mean, going to jail those couple of times. I mean, did that do anything for you, like a wake up call or anything like that with the drug use?
Not the first couple times, definitely not. I'm trying to think back of my mentality at that time. The first time I went to jail, I think I read myself my rights.
Are you serious?
Or at least I tried to. I was pretty out of it, so they probably all had a good laugh at the station.
So how many times did you end up going to jail?
So there was at least one time when I first turned 18, and that's when my mom had called the cops on me because I was being pretty unruly, which was the right thing to do. I think I would have done the same thing.
Yeah.
And kind of said, thanks, Mom.
Right.
But I didn't learn a lesson at that point in time, and I was able to get out. And then the next time was because I didn't pay the fines from the first time and I had a warrant, and then I lied about my name so I could not go to jail because I knew that I had a warrant from not paying the fines. And then one of my friends said my name.
Oh, wow. So in the heat of that moment, like you're trying to get out of it, and when your friends speak up and give out your name.
Yeah, and they're like, okay, we thought this was you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I went to jail that time, and then I got back out, and I decided I was going to try to rebuild, per se, my little experiment of, selling drugs and making money, or kind of remake my way up. So I started selling marijuana again. Wasn't really making much money. And yeah, I think I was pretty miserable. But kind of before that kind of happened, I remember I was staying at a friend's family member's house, and I was going down to the corner store to get a cigar to make a blunt to get high. And as I was going down the street, as I was walking back, I remember just I started busting out crying, walking down the street, and didn't understand exactly why. I was just kind of at a point where, and that was directly after the accident that took out the car, and then the supply, and then the bad drugs, and then so all that money went away, and I got to the point where I was selling some of the clothes that I had bought, going to the mall every day to buy new clothes because I didn't really have anything, to buy some chicken nuggets so they could have something to eat. So it was kind of like God cut me down a couple levels to realize where I was at. So I kind of had that moment, but it didn't really stick, if that makes sense.
Yeah, just kind of a realization that it sounds like the things that you had gotten to build your life up to at that point, like the success of being able to sell and make that much money, being out on your own, and then all those things get cut off, your supply, your means to get your supply, and all of a sudden, Eric the pimp, when it comes to all the clothes you were getting and stuff like that, now you're just scrounging around to buy chicken nuggets.
Yeah.
So what happened after that then? What was the breaking point then?
Yeah, so after that I went back home, and so I kind of moved back in with my mom and tried to make amends, but I wasn't any different. I just started getting back into it. And kind of what brought me to where I'm at now is when I say we, I mean the main individual that I was selling a lot of drugs with and had my connection with out of town, we went to Athens. We went to a club there. It was called Evolution at the time, and you only had to be 18 to get in. And we went a couple of times, and we were trying to go back to the old lifestyle of, spending a bunch of money and, like, just living crazy and, getting drunk and getting messed up. And so we went to Athens, and I remember drinking, and I could not kind of snap out of it, per se. I wasn't able to get drunk. I wasn't able to get high. I was really drunk. But I couldn't forget about all the stuff that was going on in my life. And we were there with a few other people, and one of the people there were 15. I was 18. And some guy hit, like, the 15-year-old kid in the face and, like, blacked his eye really bad. And so we went to where the car was parked, because the club had closed down and everyone was leaving. So this 15-year-old came up and said, "Hey, this guy punched me in the face," and told us. And we were going to go, pay him back for what he had done. And so we came around the back of the building, and we saw him. The 15-year-old had pointed him out. And I think he picked up a 2x4, the 15-year-old did.
So the kid that got hit had grabbed a 2x4 to contribute in some way.
Yeah. And I just remember it was just an all-out brawl. Everyone was leaving the club. And
did he have guys with him, this other guy?
Yeah, he had quite a few guys with him, and there were a couple of people with us. And we probably got the same amount on each side, but it just seemed like as soon as the fight started, and I don't really remember how the fight exactly started. It might have even been the 15-year-old hit the guy that hit him with the 2x4 in the face. I think I remember that, but I was pretty drunk at the time, and it's been 13, 14 years.
Yeah, it's been a little while.
Yeah, so you and I became friends right after that. We were talking about how long we've been friends. So anyway, we got in a fight, and we ended up in jail. I remember trying to run away. I could have walked away from the cops a million times, but I was trying to get back to the car to leave. And it was probably like 3 a.m, and I was in downtown Athens in the middle of the night. I had blood on my shorts and blood on my shirt, and I was walking down the street. Not that I would be inconspicuous with a newspaper.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. No, officer, this is fly blood. I was killing insects on the side of the street at 3 a.m. in Athens.
Yeah. So me and my friend were taken to jail along with a 15-year-old, and there was a couple other kids that were underage at the time. And so we happened to be the only two that were, adults at the time that were 18.
Ooh, yeah, that's not good.
Yeah. So we all ended up in jail. I remember being in the holding tank, and one of us had a cell phone, and the cops found out real quick, and so all that was the end, and then we were driven up the hill to the jail that night, and so they just kind of processed us and all that fun stuff, and the next morning we woke up and realized we were in the felony block of the jail. We weren't really quite for sure why. But a lot of the other men in there were like, yeah, you're probably going to be charged with a felony.
So what was going through your head when you realized that?
When they first told that to me, I did not believe them. I thought, I've been to jail before. They're probably just out of space in the other place. So I moved over here. And we'd only had misdemeanors, so we were going to go to municipal court. Versus the court of common pleas, which is the felony court. So we were going to the misdemeanor court versus the felony court. And I thought, they don't know what they're talking about. So we went to court, and, we kind of gave a feedback, and, we went back to jail. And shortly after that, we were served our papers that said they moved our crimes up to a felony offense. And at that time, that's when I realized that everything at that point kind of that I had been doing was irrelevant. It didn't matter. It all equated to this point in my life, which seems horrific. Probably the most horrifying part of it, I was in that jail for a couple of weeks before I was served my felony papers. And at the beginning when I got there was a guy that just got out of prison. He had served probably 15 years in prison or something of that nature, a really long time, and hadn't seen his family, hadn't been home. So what they would do with people that were coming out of prison is they would go to a county jail before they would be released back into general, be freed, right? And to be able to go out on parole and live their lives. So he was there in the county jail in the felony block where I was, and within 2 weeks he was back. And he was back because he decided to go to the liquor store. And while he was leaving the liquor store, he saw his parole officer. And versus stopping and trying to sort it out, it wasn't necessarily a crime, but he wasn't allowed to go to the liquor store and he wasn't allowed to drink. He ran from the police. Oh. So he had another 15-year term over his head and another 15 years.
Wow.
So it was 2 weeks that he had this chance to spend with his family after 10 or 15, or I don't remember how many years.
Yeah. So did you talk to this guy a lot?
Yeah, I talked to him a lot, and I think he might even had his name might have even been Eric as well. Mm. I honestly can't remember. I remember playing cards with him and things of that nature. You don't have anything else to do in jail.
Right, you get real good at euchre.
Yeah, well, spades, but
or spades.
That's what everyone played then. And
so what kind of impact did some of this guy's conversations, have with you? I mean, I'm sure he wasn't fired up to go back to prison after, getting to spend that time with his family.
Yeah, I really looked at my life, and at that point in time, we were charged with a felony, which I think it was 2 to 8 years was the term. 8 years would have been the maximum. 2 years would have been the minimum. So I thought to myself, 8 years ahead, or what would I want to do with my life? And I definitely didn't want to be stuck in prison. Mm-hmm. And I remember at the time, so my good friend at the time became my co-defendant because he and I were both charged with the like crime in the same event. So he and I were kind of doing the jail activities to get out of the cell. Well, we weren't technically in a cell. We were in a big dormitory. It was open, and you just had a TV, and you had a bunch of tables where people played cards and just made up a bunch of stories and told war stories and stupid stuff.
Right. So you guys were looking for any excuse to get
out of there.
Right.
So there were people that would come in and they would minister to the jail, and so we went, and I think they actually would give us candy.
So I think I found the motivation then for that extracurricular activity in jail.
Yeah. So it was out of there. They gave us candy. And I went to church as a kid. I grew up Catholic on my mom's side, and I went to Catholic schools. And my dad was Baptist, so I always went to Sunday school, and I was with my dad at my grandparents'. So I had a church background. So it was oh, well, this would be cool, And after they served us our felony papers, I remember my co-defendant, my good friend at the time, asked me, what are we going to do now? And I said, I don't know. I think we got to try to figure things out. And I said to him a couple of days later, I said, hey, man, when these church people come in here, I think I'm going to get saved. He said, really? Why are you going to do that? I said, dude, we don't have anything else going for us, was my response. So I remember going that night to the little service that they had, and they would, have the classic raise your hand if you want to receive Jesus. And I remember saying the sinner's prayer and, thinking I needed something more in my life than definitely what I had then. And this Jesus thing has to be better than what I'm doing right now.
So you're in jail, and you're looking at up to 8 years. So, and you're young. I mean, you're what, early 20s at that point.
I was just 18.
Yeah, you weren't even in your 20s then. So, yeah, you're 18 years old. And you go to this church service, you accept Jesus. So what happens then?
Yeah, so that began a really big, transformation point in my life. And also kind of an emotional roller coaster per se too. So I got saved, and I remember calling like a mentor at the time and telling them, "Hey, I've been reading the Bible. I read about this Paul guy. He was in jail too." And he's like, "Yeah, Eric, he was in jail because he was preaching the gospel for doing something good, not because he decided to get in a bar fight."
Right, wasn't a drug dealer.
Yeah. So,
well, you could relate with them a little bit at least.
Yeah, there was some common ground there, I remember. And so we were still allowed to have cigarettes at the time, and I was still smoking cigarettes. And as cigarettes would roll out, as we would run out of cigarettes during the week before the next commissary would come in, we would smoke the cigarette butts rolled in Bible papers. But I read the Bible pages before I
oh my gosh,
smoked them.
I have never heard this story before. So you would use Bible pages from the Bible,
like
to get the last
bike. Or the little Bibles.
Yeah, the Gideon Bibles.
Yeah, the really little ones, the pocket-sized ones.
So you would use those to smoke the filter of the cigarettes.
Yeah, everything that was left over at the end, the butts.
Oh my gosh! And so you would read those pages before you smoked them.
I did.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So anyhow,
yeah, so my level of Christian maturity at the time was at that stage. And there was one point in time I decided I wanted to trick the guards, try to steal some cigarettes. And, I didn't realize the big glass mirrors that were right next to the cell block where the big dormitory were actually see-through mirrors. Forgot all the movies and TV shows where the cops stand on the other side of the mirror and the people don't see them. So I tried to steal something and got caught right away.
So you tried to steal something right in front of the double window mirrors.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! When did you realize that those weren't just mirrors?
When they said on the speaker, "Put that down."
Oh my gosh! I bet you peed yourself a little bit.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
That was pretty crappy.
So, did you have any consequences as a result of that?
Well, yeah, I thought that this is great. I got this felony. Now I'm getting charged with attempted robbery or I don't know, petty theft or something, right? And this is going to look good before the judge. He's really shaped up.
Yeah.
He's learned his lesson. He's stealing cigarettes while he's in jail. So the consequences were that I could have spent 30 days in solitary confinement. But I don't know what you would call the jail person that worked in the jail.
Like the chaplain?
No, it was just like the worker in the jail that like the police officer in the jail.
One of the COs.
The COs.
Correctional officers.
Yeah, correctional officer.
Yeah.
So she came in and said, how do you want to plead to this? I'm like, well, I did it, right? You saw me. She's like, okay. And so I was, I had to spend a week in solitary confinement. I remember the only thing I was allowed to have at that time was a Bible, and I wasn't supposed to have a pen and pad to write letters, but they had let me have it, and then I didn't let other COs see that I had it, and so I was able to write letters, and then I had a clock that was right outside of the door. There was a small little window at the door, and I could see the clock and watch the time pass.
So what was that like?
It was a long week, but it was good. I remember I decided, I said, God, if you let me figure things out, I'll read all this. I read like the book of Psalms and I think I read like all the New Testament and I just read a bunch of the Bible and prayed. And I remember praying at the time, and I was, just asking God, let me get out of here. I want to get out of here. And I remember saying to myself, I'll pray to 3:30 because dinner came around at 4 or 5. Pray to 3:30, and then I'll lay down and wait for dinner to come, and then I can call it a day. And like right as the clock hit, like the second hand hit to 3:30, I remember right on the dot because I could see the clock and I could hear it. And, it was pretty long days. Didn't have much else to do. I heard all the power went out in the jail at the time. And so like the COs had to come get us and put us in the drunk tank where all the other people were because the COs were there versus they weren't where the solitary confinement was. They wanted to be able to see us so that we didn't do anything stupid because they didn't have power to see us on the cameras. And I remember I just felt like God had kind of spoken to me via that. I asked, is there a storm? What's going on? They're like, no, we don't really know. It's just power went out.
Wow. So that really, like, for you, that moment, it made the reality of, this thing of going to this church service and getting saved and now reading the Bible, like it put kind of the nail in confirming some of the legitimacy of it for you.
Yeah, I felt like for me that was a big way that kind of God spoke to me. And if, just that second hand hitting right on the dot, I just remember that to this day that, I just felt like God was saying he was there with me. And that it was going to be sorted and it was going to be all right. So shortly after that, I got out of jail on bail. And so it was about a year process going through the court system, almost a year to the date, I think, before everything was sorted. So it went from what was a felony 2 at the time, which was 2 to 8 years, to a felony 4, which felonies are on a scale in the state of Ohio from 5 to 1, 1 being the highest, 5 being the lowest. Before it was a maximum term for that was 18 months in prison. And I ended up receiving the ability to go to like a treatment facility, which was like a work treatment facility called SEPTA, which is based out of Nelsonville. So during that first year, my faith grew leaps and bounds. I kind of never knew what was going to happen. I didn't know if when I went to court, because I was going to court every month, and it would just kind of say, oh, we'll continue this. I didn't know if that was the day I was going to be sentenced and then taken away to prison for 8 years. I kind of didn't know. So it was just a really difficult time, but it was also a time that God used to humble me and to really grow me a lot. I learned to become more dependent on him because I really didn't know what was going to happen the next day at all. And there was just that loomingness of, going to prison for 8 years and, the rest of my life, a large portion of my life, being away I did not want it to be.
Oh, yeah. 8 years would feel like your whole life. 8 years is the difference between like getting through 4 years of, grade school and high school. 4 years is, going through college and getting a job and working for another 4 years. That's a, 18, you would have been, 26?
Mm-hmm.
So, that's, you're 4 years away from 30 at that point. So you get into SEPTA and you make it through the program. It sounds like you made it through successfully then.
Yeah, I did really well in the program. And, it was a good program. I think it was just basically rules, which was good. Wrapped that up, and it was, God was working in my life a lot then. I was able to go out, and I wasn't supposed to be able to do this, but God gave me the favor to be able to go out and do orientation for college. So I was in a rehab program, and they gave me a furlough. They would give people furlough to go home and visit family at the very end. And they would allow you to go to work and stuff like that. So I was able to work the last 3 months of it. But they gave me a furlough to let me go to college orientation. So as soon as I got out, I was starting to college.
Really? So
Yeah.
You were already, you went straight from being in SEPTA,
Mm-hmm.
which was coming right from being in jail, and got right into college. So what was your focus in college?
Focus as in?
What was your plan? What were you going to take in college? What were you going to get your degree in?
So I was going to do business.
Business. So What what made you decide to go into business? Was it just you had ran a small business prior and had some success?
Partially, and then the other part of it was also the fact that now I had a felony on my record, so I couldn't go into healthcare. There were quite a few fields that I couldn't go into.
So you had already thought about like the impact of your record, like having that felony on your record. So you were thinking about that when it came to getting a degree.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. So that year of time and then the additional 6 months, the first year between whenever I was arrested, it was almost like, I think it was 1 year to the date from the day I was arrested to eventually the day I was sentenced, which was, 18 months. But in lieu of doing 18 months in prison, go to this like halfway house treatment facility place where you can work and all this stuff, so the 18-month period there, I really thought that through. All right, what's my future going to be?
Right. So you went from, before you got picked up, not knowing, it's being day to day, you're using drugs, all that. And you end up in the bottom of the tank, in jail, looking at up to 8 years. And then you spent that time figuring out what your future is going to be. So you go to college and you end up graduating then.
Yeah, so it was, I started off in a 2-year program because I didn't want to take out student loans because I didn't know what my job opportunities would be like at the time. I was kind of always focused on not ranking up a lot of debt because I didn't know what my future would be like, even though I was anticipating to be good. I remember like holding on to a scripture, Jeremiah 29:11 says, the Lord knows the plans he has for you to give you a future and a hope. I remember holding on to that and telling that to other people that were in SEPTA with me at that time and kind of leading like Bible studies in there and things like that while I was there. But, so I got out and I did that 2-year program and I started thinking that maybe I should do more. My aunt at the time was really encouraging me to go a bit further. And I remember because I went to Ohio University and I went to the Chillicothe branch. And I was going to transfer to the Athens branch. And I don't remember who it was I talked to, but they were saying that because of my background, I potentially couldn't come to the Athens campus.
Really?
Yeah. So I don't remember how that happened. So it was just like, kind of one step after the next was you can't do this, but I did. Like before I went into the SEPTA program, I was going to join the service, and for them to waive my criminal record and the service, they were going to potentially waive the criminal record because they would treat it differently because it was a fist fight versus drug crime.
Right.
So they would, in the eyes of the military, they potentially look at it differently, but they needed less waivers that they had to give me. So they wanted me to go back to high school, even though I'd already got my GED. So I actually got a high school diploma after I got my GED. So I went back and I dropped out of high school and I went back and finished high school.
And so this was, looking back, this was before you got busted. You ended up going back and getting your high school diploma.
No, that was after.
I didn't know that. So
yeah.
you ended up getting your GED and then later went on to get your high school diploma.
Yeah, which is really weird. It's almost like impossible.
So let's talk about like some of the obstacles you've came up against. So like you were talking about transferring to Athens, and because of some of the things that were on your record, they were kind of trying to put a halt to that. Same thing with like you were looking at enlisting in the service, but because you'd only gotten a GED, you needed a high school diploma. So, and I know you and I have talked, and you've talked to me about several things that you've tried to do, and because of your past, it's made it more difficult to accomplish. So,
yeah,
when you've ran into that, like what goes through your mind? How did you overcome the emotional strain of your past decisions still coming back to sort of haunt you?
I mean, in a way, I still kind of deal with that and still, wrestle with that. For me, like I go back to that episode when I was in solitary confinement and I think of the story of Jacob. Jacob ran away from his brother because he stole his father's blessing. So if you go back the book of Genesis, he stole Esau's blessing, and then God appeared to him on the way as he was fleeing into his uncle's house. I was in no way like Jacob, but God had an encounter with me, and I realized that God was, there. And, Jacob's encounter with God, he said, God's surely here. And then later, Jacob had another encounter with God where he wrestled with the angel and he walked with a limp after that. So I feel like, in a way, God used that event of me getting in that fist fight, well, the bar fight, and making that not a misdemeanor, because I could have technically pled guilty to the misdemeanor and I would have ended that whole series. That whole piece of my life would have been done, but I wouldn't have really changed any. I would have continued on and probably ended up worse, right? Like, and if I would have gotten a felony drug conviction, I couldn't have got federal funding to go to school either. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of things where God really used that event, that fist fight, to humble me, to transform me, and to make me more dependent on him. So, after I got in the fight, after I went to, jail, after I got out, and, was waiting for my trial to be completed, every month there was another thing, right, that I had to get through and figure out. And it was just learning to become humble and depend on God. And God was, in a way, humbling me with what I had made, the poor decision I had made in my life, but he was using that to mold me, to make me better than I could have been, if I would have accepted the misdemeanor and, just continued my life. I probably would have ended up dead potentially, because the life I wanted to pursue, I wouldn't have changed.
Right. And so, it almost sounds like, especially comparing, what happened to you and happened to Jacob, like that encounter that he had with the angel, like you said, he had a limp afterwards. And so it'd be really easy to look back at your life and see, all these things that you went through, and then having that on your record. But to some extent, it's kind of defined who you are now. Not that you're an ex-drug dealer, but that you've been able to overcome all of those things.
Yeah.
So, and now talk a little bit about, I know you and I, you've worked kind of all kinds of different jobs,
mm-hmm.
Over the years, but you've kind of settled into more of a career path now. So why don't you explain a little bit of what you're doing now?
Yeah. So we were talking a bit ago, we were talking about going through school and I was trying to go to the main campus of Ohio University and finish up a 4-year program. I wanted to get into the College of Business there because I had been taking a 2-year business program at Chillicothe, and that was kind of an obstacle whether or not I was too far in my program in school and stuff. And I ended up talking the dean into letting me get into the College of Business, and God gave me favor there.
So you convinced the dean to let you in.
It was assistant dean, but yeah.
So wait a second here. So they didn't just immediately accept you, and you had to put a little more effort in to make sure you got accepted into the School of Business.
Yeah, I had, because explicitly at that time I was a junior, and I had a lot of the prerequisites, but I didn't have everything, and I hadn't done a lot of the things I had needed to do. But I figured out a way where I could kind of do that, fast tracking it all, taking on extra work. And so I went with my plan to the dean and said, hey, I want to do this. And he's like, I don't see any reason why you can't. So then I did it.
No, that's awesome. And, that's a great example of a lot of times in life, we run into roadblocks, and it's real easy to look at that roadblock and say, well, I can't go this direction now. I need to figure something else out.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a great example of you wanted to do something. It didn't look like you were going to be able to do it based on your current circumstances, like the credits that you had, the prerequisites. But then you did a little extra work, looked at if you took on a heavier workload, you'd be able to do it, and brought it to the assistant dean. And they said, you know what, you're right.
Yeah. So I feel like I had to be my own advocate, but more than that, God was obviously my advocate, because, there were a lot of things that weren't supposed to happen that happened.
Yeah.
I wasn't supposed to get a GED and then get a high school diploma, right? That's not what is supposed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then further than that, one of the biggest fears that I had all throughout college was, all right, it's time for me to get a job. When I was going to the Chillicothe branch, it was a little more untraditional.
Mm-hmm.
So the students there were a lot older, and it was like based on just work, getting some degree to do better in your current job, and it might not have been, I don't know, it wasn't, like starting out into a new career per se.
Right. It's more of degrees based on like if you work at an employer and as a result you need to do continued education or you need to get some type of degree to receive some type of promotion at your current job versus actually getting a degree and starting out your initial career path.
Yes, and a lot of the people that were going to school at the main campus of Athens were obviously a bit younger because I started a couple years after because I had a 2-year sidetrack of everything that kind of God took me through and all my trouble that I had gotten into. So I was looking for a job, and the biggest fear was I'm not going to get a job because I'm a convicted felon.
So what I know you've had jobs up to the point, but you ended up getting work that when I found out what you were doing, I was like, man, that's fantastic. And, let me back up and make sure everyone realizes, like, Eric and I, we kind of have somewhat similar backgrounds. I never got busted for anything or anything like that, but we have both been clean for probably about the same amount of time.
Yeah.
So, because I know for me, it was summer of 2005.
That was the same thing.
Yeah. And so we never knew each other when we were both partying. I don't know, we may have crossed paths and didn't realize it. We were probably like, I was probably like, who's that gangster guy over there? And you were probably like, who's that hippie with long hair? But so we never knew each other back then. But we knew each other's pasts. And I would always comment to people and say it's always crazy to think about who Eric was and what I've heard from you, but people that know you now would never believe it.
Yeah.
And so talk about the company that you ended up getting. I don't know if you feel comfortable mentioning their name, but the type of work you got into.
Yeah. So I was doing a lot of interviews and stuff like that. They had a lot of on-campus events. I didn't have a chance to do internships which a lot of the other students had a chance to do, but they had also been in that program for longer. So I kind of went out and made up my own internship, found a local business to work with them. And
so you couldn't find an internship, so you just asked, did you just go up and say, hey, I'll work for free?
Yeah. So I just found someone to do some work for and built a website and stuff like that. And so I was doing business, but I was also doing like IT business. It's technically management information systems. But
you went and got this job. Like, it wasn't even a job. It was an internship. So were you getting paid?
No, I wasn't.
And had this company taken on interns before?
No.
So,
I was volunteering to do some work for them to have some sort of
like get experience, build your resume, things like that. So that's a really good point to point out because it's, you kind of built some, I know, like, I don't want this to sound bad, but you learned how to hustle the wrong way and paid the consequences for it. But some of those, you were able to turn some of those characteristics for the good and didn't let, just because an obstacle got in your way, you went out and got creative and you ended up volunteering for a company and getting quote unquote internship experience, even though it wasn't necessarily a company that had ever taken them before. So that's awesome.
Yeah. So I kind of leveraged a little bit of that and, grades and just built a relationship with a small consultancy firm. It was based out of Columbus that a few of the guys had graduated from OU, and I had good relationships with the professors, and they had put in a good word for me, and I ended up in a corporate consulting job right out of college.
Wow.
Being, also a convicted felon. And
so wait. So let's explain to the people that don't understand. So corporate consultant, what does that mean? What were you doing?
So, let me break it down in layman's terms. I was coming in and doing contract work for large corporations, like Fortune 500 companies, on business and IT processes. So, specifically in their finances. So I was helping larger companies figure out the way to use the system that we were implementing or installing and setting up for them to run their organization and to help their company make more money. And this was right after the financial crisis of like 07, 08, 09. So everyone was trying to figure out how do we do better with our money, big companies inclusive. So I was there helping them do that.
So here you are, a guy with a felony on his record, used to be a drug dealer, used to be a drug addict, and now you're consulting for Fortune 500 companies, helping them not only run their IT systems more efficiently, but helping them to make more money legally and save money. Like, that's amazing.
It really is. I remember the first meeting I came into. I went into this building, and I was up on the high floor and walked in. It might have been like the controller instead of the CFO. So controller inside of corporate is someone that's directly under a CFO. The CFO reports in the CEO, and I remember just sitting in that meeting thinking, I am so out of place, but this is awesome.
And so, how'd you do with that position?
I did really well. I mean, I excelled, and God gave me a lot of favor, and within a year, like, I was prospecting with like 4 other job opportunities in the same field, and I built a skill set that was in demand, that was kind of really specialized, and so really did well. God really blessed me in that,
and it's even gotten to the point now where you're even doing some of your own work.
Yeah. Yep. So I kind of started out doing doing the consultancy with the IT/finance. I wanted to get off the road because I had gotten married in college at 24, and my wife and I were I started traveling on the road, and that was kind of like a...
Now, when he says traveling on the road, like, I don't think you all understand. Like, Eric, what's some of the most exotic places you've been?
I mean, work-wise, it wasn't overly exotic. Like, I mean, it was like Louisville to Atlanta to Chicago at first, and then I ended up doing some international work in England. So the first bit was traveling within the States Monday or like Sunday night or Monday morning through Friday. And then I wanted to get off the road to be at home, because I would end up in these cities, and I would go to the local park, and I would see people there spending time with their friends and family. And I thought I should be at home with my friends and family and be at home with my wife rather than just being married on the weekends. So I took a job locally in Columbus, Ohio, and I ended up traveling, I wouldn't say more, but longer. I would always be home on the weekends. When I started traveling internationally, it would be a few weeks at a time at a minimum because of the ticket price. So, so I took a bit of whenever I tried to leave, my boss was an amazing boss. He saw that I had a job and he actually got me a different job, and then he tried to double my salary. And, so I gave up a bit there, but I wanted a different bit of a lifestyle. And when I took on this new job, I didn't end up with necessarily the lifestyle that I wanted. I really enjoyed the opportunities, traveling for work and things like that. It was nice to go places. I also got a chance to kind of explore outside of that. Being in Europe, everything was very close. So, I flew my wife over, and we stayed for a month and got to spend a week and, go through Paris and Spain and a few other places. And it was about that time that I realized I kind of didn't like what I was doing, and I wanted to do something a bit different. Not that I didn't like it, that I just didn't feel like it was the right fit for me 100%. I really enjoyed figuring out how businesses grew. Really enjoyed that part of it, and creating something new. But I ended up taking an opportunity that was in the same field, but was 100% virtual.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that was so that I could do something on my own. I wanted to have that bit of extra time, and that's kind of what's been the last probably 2 years that I've started into doing personal financial planning, and then also tax on the side as well. But
yeah, so let's plug, if you want to, let's plug your thing right now that you're working on.
Yeah, so the biggest, I guess I'll tell people, my day job is that I work with corporations, helping them figure out how to handle their money better. via IT solutions and understanding their business processes. But my passion project is doing that for individuals, helping them to kind of shape their lives and use the money that they have for something that's actually meaningful for them versus just surrendering it to the next fun thing, and kind of planning a bit in your life and thinking a little bit more constructively about what you want your future to be like. So that specifically is Moment Financial Planning.
Yeah. So that everyone understands, his personal finance consulting. I'm using the right terms, right?
Personal financial planning.
Personal financial planning.
Say so.
I got to use the right terminology here. I don't want to be that guy. So, is Moment, give them the name one more time.
Moment Financial Planning.
Yeah.
And the website's Moment FP because it's a bit shorter. So
there you go, momentfp.com. So, and I think it's interesting that like your life started, going downhill with you making poor life decisions and poor financial decisions. And now it's come full circle where you're helping people with their personal finances, helping them figure out what their financial goals are and helping them get on track. And to go back, you made two statements over and over and over about one, that God gave you favor in multiple different situations and that God humbled you. And when it comes to favor, I believe a lot of times that is not just, I don't want to sound spooky tunes here, but like some type of supernatural highlighting to people in authority that are maybe decision makers. But I also believe it's something that happens in us, that our character is displayed in a way that surprises people, that maybe is abnormal. And you even described that as that you were humbled, that you feel like you were humbled. And, humility is something like real humility is something that isn't super attractive because a lot of times it means not worrying about getting all the credit, but still putting in all the work. And looking back at a lot of your life experiences, Eric, what do you feel like is some of the strength of who you are now that some of those hard times created? Like, kind of created who you were. Like when you think about favor, the things that changed in who you were, Eric the drug dealer, Eric the drug addict, to who you are now, that have helped given you some of that favor, that have helped, give you some of that humility, and has helped kind of define the personal strength, the mental strength, the spiritual strength of who you are now.
Yeah, I guess I think about it in two ways. One, the humility is, like you said, is not always the prettiest thing. And I think more so of like what it means to be humbled. And I think about what God took me through, the grittiness of despair, like not knowing that things were going to work out and trying to make things work out, but having no assurance that they were going to work out. So much so that I was completely dependent on God at that point in time. On Jesus to move in my life. Like I had no other option. I remember, I mentioned earlier, when I was in jail at the time and I decided to get saved, I went to my friend, my co-defendant, and said, "Hey man, I'm going to get saved whenever these people come in here." He said, "Why?" There's nothing else going on for us. There was no other option for me. And, learning to just let there not be another option for me was a really hard process. And then seeing God open the doors that were not options for me because of, basically what should not have been. Like, logically it does not make sense. But God made it happen. Was just astounding. It was just unbelievable to see that. And that was also humbling in itself. That okay, you are here. You are with me. You are listening. You know what I mean? Like. Takes me back to that moment when I was in that solitary confinement and clock hit 3:30 on the second and the power went out. Sounds, it's not dramatic or anything like that. It's not like the jail broke open in the Bible and I got to walk out. But the power went out and I went to the drunk tank instead. But I knew that God was with me at that point.
Yeah. Well, I know one thing that you said that kind of sticks out to me is the moment that you told your friend that I think I'm going to get saved tonight, and you said there's no other better option. And it's like all the obstacles that you've faced, even as a result of your past, when you've decided that this is the route I'm going to go, that this is the option that I'm going to take, regardless of how much adversity you've faced, you've either figured out a way to do more work to get there, or gotten creative and found another route to get to that destination. Would you agree with me there?
Yeah, I think that is definitely, something that God put in me. It's just not to give up. Right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, things seem difficult, but, there is a process potentially that God's, leading you or has led me through or is leading me through to figure out, or to become the different person that he wants us to become. It wasn't just, zip, I went from jail to, I went to a program and started college. It was 18 months of God really working in my life to change me. And because of that, I didn't change, or I didn't, forget what had happened in my life and go right back to it as I started into college and say, there's college kids here. Maybe they'll want some drugs.
Right.
That was, part of that defining aspect of my life. And through that process of being inventive or rethinking situations and applying additional work, God shaped me and made me who I am today.
Yeah. And I know, that there's all kinds of different people that might be listening to this podcast that maybe they've been in similar situations, maybe they're currently in those situations, or maybe even you have family members that are in those situations. And drugs is one common thread that many of us, if not all of us, have experienced, whether personally ourselves or loved ones or friends or family that we know. But there's all sorts of situations that can put us in a position that seems not favorable to succeed. But the thing I like about Eric's story is it's a story of, if you're willing to persevere, if you're willing to stick to what you feel like is your road, is your path. And for him, a big part of that was his relationship with God and with Jesus Christ. And so that helped define some of that perseverance and being willing to say, it's not denying the past, but it's willing to use the past as a motivator to say, if I have to find a creative route around this obstacle, or if I have to put in extra work, I'm going to get to my goal. And that's a big part of this podcast. Really, the whole goal of this podcast is getting the chance for people to tell their story and to show the things that they've been through, whether it's the area they grew up, whether it was the personal decisions they made, or the circumstances that they had to deal with, helping to define the person they are now and helping them reach, whether it's their dreams, their goals, whatever it might be, and help define who they were. And so I like to use the term state strong almost like a slang, that the state is who you are currently, your state of being, your mind, your physical body, and even your spiritual self, and the strength that you've gained from your life experiences. So Eric, I thank you again for being on the podcast.
Dude, it's been awesome.
Yeah, I mean, Eric and I have to be careful just not talking too long anyhow. So until next time, folks, stay state strong, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks again, guys, for tuning in to the State Strong podcast. I was so stoked to have Eric on, especially on the seminal episode of State Strong podcast. Like I said, I've known the guy for years and years and years. We've been through all kinds of things together. And I think his story is pretty daggone crazy, especially if I didn't know Eric back when he was in his wilder days, but he's probably one of the most well-spoken friends of mine that I have. And you would never in a million years think that that's the background he came from. So thanks again for tuning in, guys. I really appreciate your support, and continue to tune in each time we get one of these posted. And if you enjoy it, please give us a rating and a comment, whether you're watching this on YouTube, whether you're listening on one of the various podcasts platforms like iTunes or any of the other ones. And again, if you enjoy it, share it, get the word out, and hopefully some other people can join in on the State Strong movement. Thanks again, guys.